How I celebrated 2020 and what I'm willing to do in 2021. Hi guys, I am Tess. I am the last of a family of 5 children. The girls were 3, and the boys were 2. I was the third girl and the last child, and I must confess it had its advantages. I had the protection and favor of my elder siblings while growing up. If I was denied anything by either of them, I just had to go the next, and even I was still denied, I knew that I would get it before going to the 5 of them. On one rare occasion, it seemed as though they all ganged up on me as I was surprised when they all turned me down. Well, I always had a backup plan, mummy or daddy. It was really incredible being the major object to favor. During my childhood days, I was not given much chores as the others. I had the luxury of sitting in front of the television with a bowl of popcorn, while others cleaned the house, and if I was asked to assist during my time out, I simply cried my eyes out until either mummy or daddy intervened by asking that I be left alone. I was not being spoilt. I was simply enjoying what every child who has siblings older than her should enjoy. It was as I advanced to my teenage years that I discovered that everything with an advantage equally has a disadvantage. I was sent on errands around the house at odd times by everyone. I was called to bring this, take this, pick this, get this, wash this, and every other annoying message which seemed to be available each time I wanted to have some fun. My strategy of crying and making noises just to alert mummy and daddy that it was time to come to my rescue seemed to now work very well against me, as they only ended up getting mad at me for my disobeying my elders who did things for me when I couldn't do them myself. They made me understand that I was now grown up and needed to assume a level of responsibility around the house just as everyone else did. It was during those times I greatly wished that I was still the baby Tess that everyone wanted to pamper. The one-time center of attention for a favor now turned to the object used in getting little things done. Nevertheless, I would never trade my siblings for another. It was nice to have people that are ahead of me because it gave me an opportunity to learn from their mistakes and experiences. They always seemed to have opinions on every experience I was going through, and most times they would tell me how certain things were likely going to play out. My both parents were huge, and so we all looked bigger than our ages. At 20 years of age, my eldest sister, Nellie, could easily be mistaken for Daddy's wife. She even behaved like a mummy, assistant mummy. She always looked out for the welfare of the rest of us. She wanted everything done in order, just as Mummy would. She was neat, and would always frown at anyone who dropped a waste anywhere, or anyone who moved past something that was out of place. She was articulate and precise. In the absence of Mom, she assumed the responsibility of dishing out chores and making sure that each one of us does thorough work. She always tried as much as possible to avoid mistakes, and she got so hard on herself when she did. Nellie was good at studying people, and often used her head rather than her heart. She was not always moved by emotions and sentiments. She was the toughest of us all, and she always demanded respect from the rest of us. This was where she often had issues with Richard. Richard was the second child and first boy. He was 2 years younger than Nellie, but you would think he was married. At 22, Richard looked so mature that if you visited our house when Dad was away, you would think that he was the man of the house, even though he never acted so. He loved his space and hated being bossed around, something Nellie often did. This was no wonder they always had issues that we had all gotten used to. Richard was a fine young man who was heavily built. He had no issues getting the attention of ladies. On several occasions, Richard had been approached by women who were far older than him. There was one time he was even approached by a married lady who was twice his age, and all she just wanted was sex. He, however, how best not to set a bad example for the younger ones who were behind him, so he often had his escapades with ladies outside the home. Patty was next in line. She was 2 years younger than Richard. She easily got along with people and had a great distaste for arguments. If you ever got into an argument with Patty over something that was rightfully hers, she was likely going to let it go. She always loved a serene and peaceful atmosphere. Patty was emotional and naive, and one could easily take advantage of her. It was no new thing to see Patty crying over a guy. She never did seem to learn her lesson though, as the next guy who shows her a little bit of affection was sure to win her heart. 2 years after Patty was born, my parents welcomed Tim into the family. Tim was a good friend to keep, but a very bad for to have. He could love as easily as he could hate. Tim always saw the good in everybody, until he was shown their bad side. He was the kind of person who wouldn't judge another based on rumors. Tim had no issues trusting you. But when you betrayed his trust, one thing was certain: you had found a foe for life. It took about 3 years before I was introduced into the family tree, and that was because my parents never really planned for me. I came anyhow. Though I wasn't planned for, I was welcomed. My parents, however, took measures to ensure I had no one behind me. We were a typical family, just like everyone else. We had the regular fights and misunderstandings which children in other homes had. However, one thing which was clear to outsiders was that they were not permitted to mess with either of us. An assault on one of us was an assault on all of us, and you could be sure that we would always react as a group. One time when Patty was 7 years old, she was constantly picked on by a bully in her class. He constantly took a part of her lunch. Patty was not suited for a fight, so she constantly let him have his way. This bully threatened to severely deal with her if she reported to anyone. She suffered quietly, not because she was afraid of what would become of her when she told her elder siblings, but she knew what awaited the bully once Nellie and Richard, who were 9 and 11 years then, get to know. Her fears soon came to pass when the news of her maltreatment got to Nellie through a friend of Patty's. Nellie wasn't going to wait around to confirm it the rumor was true. She immediately marched down to the playground and saw crying as the bully was about to leave with part of her lunch. Like a hungry lioness who just found a defenseless lamb, Nellie pounced on him with all of her aggression and might. The bully couldn't tell what had hit him, but it hit him really hard. Patty and the few kids around stood watching. Nellie couldn't be stopped, and most of the kids didn't even want her to, because they have been victims of this notorious bully. Some kids ran to call any teacher in sight, while others ran to call Richard to come and stop Nellie. Richard was in class when he was told that Nellie was fighting at the playground. Richard quickly rushed to the playground, and rather than stop Nellie, who was beating up the bully, he immediately joined her to inflict more pain. The teachers finally arrived and separated the fight. That day, our parents were called alongside the parents of the bully who had just lost 3 teeth. Upon inquiry, the school authorities discovered that Patty was not the only victim of this bully who had constantly picked on kids. He was suspended from school for 4 weeks while Nellie and Richard were sent on detention for taking laws into their hands. When the bully returned, he avoided Patty like plague. Even though we watched out for each other, and we often spent time together, there were still moments where the girls had secrets that they were not willing to share with the boys, and of course, there were things too that the boys didn't share with everyone else, so you could find the boys alone, separated from the girls. I, however, had the privilege of listening to both parties when I was allowed. I was the baby of the house after all. We all knew that Patty was vulnerable because of her personality, and could easily be taken for granted, so Nellie decided to help her whenever she passed through any crisis. She acted as a guide, especially when it came to relationship issues with boys. What Nellie did for Patty, Richard did for Tim. Although Tim was more outspoken than Patty, it seemed as though he could sometimes be as naive, especially when it had to do with ladies, and so Richard, who was ahead of him in every way, equally acted as a guide. It didn't matter what advice and guidance these two had, they always seemed to fall prey. There was a guy who moved into the area where we stayed. He was 23 years old. He was cute, and the kind of guy every girl would die to have, and Patty was one of the girls. Ladies began flocking around him. Patty felt like the luckiest girl in the world when he started making advances at her. What others were running after, came running after her. She felt special, and that feeling was what got her into a mess. He was all Patty could, and would choose to think about. She went out of her way to please him as much as she could. Nellie knew this guy was no good. She had been there before, and she saw the red flag. She tried telling Patty to take things slow because not much was known about this guy. I watched as Patty defended him. She said his name was Matt, and he wasn't just any guy. Nellie knew that at this point, nothing she said to Patty would be welcomed by her, so she left her. It wasn't long before the things Nellie said started coming to light. Matt always had one sorry story, or the other to tell, so that he could feed off Patty's allowance. Whenever he took her out on a date, he always seemed to have misplaced his wallet, which he claimed contained his credit card. Patty would end up paying. This was just his move, so he could have a free lunch or dinner because he was totally broke and did not know where his next meal was going to come from. He always claimed to have rich parents who were out of town, and he never failed to make empty promises to Patty which he never fulfilled. He promised to buy her the world when she would be celebrating her 18th birthday. However, 3 days before her birthday, he stopped talking to her. She tried getting in touch with him, but it was not possible. On her 18th birthday celebration, he was nowhere to be seen. Patty was furious, disappointed, and heartbroken. How could he disappoint her on the very day that she needed to show him to everyone? She just hoped that he had a good explanation. She couldn't imagine her elder sister Nellie being right all along. It was the day after her birthday celebration that he sent a message to her through one of his friends. He claimed to have been in the hospital for 3 days, and only just got back home. Patty felt bad, guilty, and sad. She became angry at herself for thinking that Matt may have played her when he was in the hospital all along. She quickly over his place. She was determined to stand by his side. Before leaving his place, she gave him part of the money she had received the previous day during her birthday celebration. It was when she had almost boarded a cab that she discovered she had left her mobile phone behind at Matt's place. It was when she was about knocking on the door that she overheard his discussions with his friends. He was not ill. He never was. It was his plan all along. He had no money to buy her the things that he had promised her for a birthday, and so he had to devise a means to stay away. He equally did not want to take the risk of being seen by some of Patty's friends who were equally his victims. He equally knew that Patty would get some monetary gifts at her birthday, and he wanted to have a share, and now he had. He had killed 3 birds with 1 stone. Patty listened with teary eyes as Matt and his friends made jest of her. They called her stupid, naive, crazy, and delusional for falling for Matt. They said that they were amazed to see someone this big with no brains to match her size, and it was only a matter of time before Matt would sleep with her. Patty was hit hard, and her wound was too deep. She had heard enough. She would probably die right there if she heard any more. She quickly turned around and picked up a cab. The cab driver really felt sorry for Patty as he drove her back home. She was weeping as though she wanted to die from it. The driver, who was seriously concerned about what might have happened to her, failed at getting an answer from her. Immediately he got to our house, she ran out of the car and made her way into the house without paying him. We were all in the sitting room, Dad, Mom, and the rest of us, when she ran past everyone without even waiting around to greet them. It was clear that something was wrong. But before we could get to her, she locked the door and began crying profusely. It was just then that the cab driver came knocking on the door and politely told us Patty was yet to pay him. He did get his money, but it was after he was made to answer a series of questions about what happened to Patty. He told us all he knew, and from all indications, he was telling the truth. Nellie knew that whatever it was that put Patty this way had to do with Matt. We tried getting Patty to open up. It had been a whole day since the incident. She had missed dinner, and breakfast was about missing lunch. We all took turns to appeal to her to come out. She seemed not to listen to anybody, not even Mom, and Dad could get her to open up. It was Nellie who eventually had her open up after she told her that she knew Matt was behind this whole thing. When Patty came out, she looked really pale, and so before asking her any questions, we all pleaded with her to eat some food. After eating, Nellie helped clean her up before Mom and Dad put her to bed. She needed rest. A lot of it. Richard and Tim eagerly waited just to know who or what had caused their sister such pain. They just needed a name and address. It was an hour before dinner time that Patty woke up and was finally ready to tell us what happened. Patty had barely gone halfway with her story when Richard and Tim made for the door, and we all knew their destination and next action. It took a lot for Daddy to restrain them both. Our dad was a cop, and so, he always wanted things done by the book. He had always been against us taking laws into our hands. After listening to Patty, Daddy noted that this was a fraudulent case of manipulation, one that the law seriously frowned at. Our dad did, however, note that, although Patty had just been victimized, there was no evidence to support her claim, and it was just her word against Matt. If we were going to get justice for Patty, then we needed to beat Matt at his own game. We needed some evidence. Patty was then made to call Matt that evening to tell him that she had left her phone at his place. Patty played her part so well that Matt didn't suspect a thing in the world. She asked about his health, about his friends, then asked to take him out for lunch the next day, so that he could bring her mobile phone along. It was the kind of opportunity Matt always desired, and so he readily accepted. The plan was to avoid going to his house now he was seen for what he was, a snake. Dad had to warn Patty against being in a private area with him because he could rape her. While she played her part, Dad would do some investigations just to know more about Matt. We all knew that Patty was going through a lot, and so we were very determined to give her all the love and support that she would need. She officially became the baby of the house on a temporal basis. Nellie knew that Patty had to set her emotions aside if she was going to successfully make Matt pay. She knew that Patty, who was very emotional, would find it very difficult playing Matt's own game of deception when she was still into him, so to help Patty, she called her that into her room that evening for a chit-chat. I was already with Nellie when she entered the room. She immediately began apologizing to Nellie for not taking her advice when she gave it. Nellie couldn't hide a grin as she told Patty that she was never angry at her. I listened as she told Patty that she only knew it would turn out this way because she had been there before. Just like Patty, she had been hurt severally in the past, that she had now become familiar with the red flags and could tell someone who was a scam from a mile away. Nellie said that the knowledge she had gained from her bitter experiences made her decide to always put her head before her heart. She had toughened up over time. She now began advising Patty and me against tolerating what we don't like from a guy. She said that when you get a little bit tolerant, they end up trying to take you for a ride, and so, if at any point in any relationship we become uncomfortable, we should immediately call it quits. There should always be a line which we shouldn't let the guys cross. She then further gave an instance of her experience with a guy 3 years ago. She said that when the guy wanted to date her, She never liked him because he was dirty. He had a terrible body odor that his cologne couldn't hide. When he opened his mouth to profess his undying love, she could only smell death. His breath stank. She saw that they were not compatible in any way. She took cleanliness very seriously, and he just seemed too comfortable in filth. It was a red flag, which meant that she shouldn't go further, but because almost all of her friends were having boyfriends, she didn't want to feel left out, and so, she just tolerated him. It was when she was invited for a romantic dinner at his place that she knew the relationship was doomed. There was nothing romantic about the atmosphere. He was dirty to the bones and never seemed to care. This was more than she bargained for, and she wasn't having any more of it. It was when she told him that she couldn't continue anymore that he decided to rape her, and although he did not succeed because she raised an alarm, the incident traumatized her for a while. Nellie was a great sister, and she deserved every respect we gave her. Her words of encouragement were all Patty needed to hear. I usually enjoyed the times when we bonded like this. I never told anyone that I already had a guy who wanted me to be his girlfriend. Thanks to Nellie, I then knew that it wouldn't work because of the red flags I saw. Her advice then made me realize what my vision for the coming year 2021 was, growing in self-love and personal development, and I was determined to start actualizing the vision from the year 2020 that was soon going to be over. During lunch with Matt the next day, Patty was really composed. The words of Nellie last night had a great impact on her. She had rehearsed everything she was going to say, and how she was going to behave during lunch. As usual, she paid for the food with the money Dad had given her. Since the whole family was now involved, Dad and Mom made sure that she had the money needed to satisfy Matt's greed. Matt pounced on the dish without mercy. It was when he had eaten to his satisfaction that he then began reassuring Patty of his undying love. He claimed that he had been telling his imaginary rich parents about her, and they were eager to meet her when they got into town. Patty acted as she fell for his story, and even though Matt tried taking her back to his place, she claimed that she had to pick up groceries for Mom and that she had already overstayed. Before leaving, she gave him some money before he started making up stories. Later on during dinner, Daddy told us that he had been checking up the public records available, but nothing came out of it. There was no record of any Matt Delaney in the system. Something was not right. Why was there no information on him? It was at that point that my dad knew the case was more serious than we had taken it to be. He involved the state by officially opening a false identity and fraud case against the alleged Matt Delaney, and investigations officially began. Even though we were terrified at the suggestion that Patty took the risk of placing her life in the hands of a person she didn't know, we were relieved to learn that we now had the resources of the government about disposal. We, however, knew that we needed to play safe. We needed to be careful about the way we were using Patty as a tool in the investigation. It took 3 weeks before the breakthrough came. There had been 3 unsolved murder cases in various parts of the states. The victims who were usually raped before being killed were between 18 and 24 years of age. The pattern was always the same, but no matter how hard the authorities tried, it always led to a dead end. Finally, a shred of evidence had surfaced, and it led the investigators right into our city. After forensic scientists carried out several tests, the result matched the DNA which was obtained from the private part of one of the victims. It was while going through the file that my dad discovered a familiar face. It was Matt. However, although the face was the same, the name was not. The name was Todd Humphrey. There were equally 2 other faces alongside Todd. Patty was called in to see if she could identify any of the faces. When she got to the station, just as my dad had said, she identified Todd Humphrey as Matt, and she even went further to identify the remaining 2 faces as his friends who occasionally visited Todd. The cops immediately made a warrant for their arrest, but they were going to be strategic about it. The plan was to arrest the 3 friends at the same time, but it was difficult getting them to be in the same place. 2 of the friends of Todd were arrested while on their way back from getting supplies, and several illegal items such as guns, ammunition, cocaine, and various fake passports containing their names. Upon interrogation, they both agreed to be involved in the killing of the 3 murder victims. They claimed that they would study the victims for weeks before either of them would try to establish a romantic relationship with the victim. They equally gave accounts of how they would dupe the victims of large sums of money, and would eventually introduce the victim to drugs, but if the victim refused to be initiated into the use of drugs, they then knew that they stood a chance of getting reported to the authorities, and so, had no other option than to end the life of the victim. This, they did by taking turns to rape her before killing her. They noted that all 3 of their victims had refused to take drugs. The police raided Todd's house, but he wasn't there, just as his friends had said. They said that they have certain times which they communicated, and if there was no communication from anybody, then it was an indicator that something had gone wrong. It was when they were about communicating with Todd that the cops showed up, and Todd would probably have gone into hiding. The cops further questioned them to know if they had any idea where Todd might be hiding, but they said that they had decided against letting each other know their whereabouts, just in case the police caught up with any of them. It was at this point that the police knew that Patty was their biggest chance of catching Todd, but they knew that if they alerted the neighborhood, he would be certain that he was wanted, and would further try to evade them, so they waited to see if he would contact her, and he did. Todd called Patty and claimed to be in danger. He said that some persons were after his life. They wanted to kidnap and make some money off of him because of who his parents were. He asked Patty for some money to get out of the city but promised to send it back to her when he got together with his parents. Patty said that she could have the money ready by 2 p.m. the following, but she didn't know how to reach him. He said that he couldn't disclose it to her for her own safety. However, he told her to get ready by 2 p.m., as he was going to call her to give her directions on where to meet. As soon as he hung up the call, the cops who had been listening began setting plans in motion. The money was made available to Patty, who equally had a tracker placed on her. The cops would have stationed themselves around the area where she would be meeting up with him if he had disclosed the location, but he was smart enough not to. He called Patty 2 hours before the agreed time. This action almost jeopardized the plan of the cops, who were not yet ready, as they thought that they still had 2 more hours. Patty was left with no other option than to go without the cops, as any delay would get Todd suspicious. Although all hope was not lost as she had the tracker on, the cops were far behind. Patty soon found herself in a popular clubhouse filled with all manner of people. It was a place she had never been to. It was while she stood inside looking lost that she received a text asking her to come to a particular room upstairs. It was in there that she met Todd. He observed that she was not as excited as before, and when he asked her what the matter was, she said she was only really sad that he would be leaving. He seemed to fall for the lie, even though she was afraid, as every other person who was alone with a murderer would. After she gave him the money, he wanted something more. He wanted what he had long desired. But this was something that she didn't bargain for, so she told him that she needed to go home before they realized that she had been gone for too long. He wasn't buying this now. This was the last time that he was ever going to set his eyes on her, and he would have his way, one way or another. He reached for her and forcefully started taking off her clothes. When she resisted, he hit her really hard, and that was when the tracker fell off. Todd was furious. He knew that Patty was a means of getting to him. He immediately pulled a gun. But before he could pull the trigger, the cops broke into the room, and a gunfight ensued. He was shot multiple times to the head, and he was pronounced dead on the spot. But not after a shot fired by him hit Patty on her chest. We all waited in the hospital for the doctor's verdict. When he came out of the theater, he said that Patty would live. The bullet had missed her heart. She was stabilized. We felt great relief. The fear of losing Patty had cast a shadow of gloom over all of us, but now, we were grateful for the light of hope shining. Patty returned home 3 months later. To celebrate her return, I sensitized the girls in my school on the need for self-love and emotional maturity. By 2021, I would set up a GoFundMe account for Patty that will enable us to generate the funds to reach out to more girls. Hey guys, what would you do if you were me? What would you do if you were me? What would you do if you were me?